All right. 9:03. Well, 9:03 my time, 10:03 Eastern, and I'm not sure what it is in Sweden. Sorry, but welcome everybody. So, kind of picking up our COVID webinar series again. Here this morning to talk about the importance of a robust PQI parts quality program. We did one of these in February, I believe it was. So if you didn't catch it, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of kind of more importance focused on this area in the industry here in the last few months. So we thought we would do another one. And so I'm glad you guys, can join and talk about this. So a couple housekeeping notes. We've got all parties on mute for the duration of the webinar. We'll open it up afterwards for everybody to speak. And you can also use the chat feature as well as the Q&A button to submit any kind of questions throughout the webinar if something comes up. It'll be recorded as well. So if any of your colleagues wanted to join and they couldn't, or you enjoyed the webinar today and wanted to send it on, you'll be able to do that. So you'll get a copy of the recording, and we can make the deck available too if needed. So I've got Dave Mueller here with me today. So I'm Matt Schustrick, VP of Sales here at Paragon, and I've also got Dave Mueller here. So Dave's been in the industry for quite a long time, haven't you, Dave? 40 years. Starting out with Sergeant Lundy, then moving on to Exelon for 20 years, holding a lot of different positions, didn't you? So Dave was one of the actual creators of Exelon's PQI program, and as most of you know, Exelon was the founder of PQI in general, and Dave was part of that team. And so he was also part of the Industry Equipment Reliability Working Group, working directly with IMPO and any supplier-related PO&Cs. So Dave and I joined Paragon about 1 week apart, coming up on 7 years. We've been here, but he's definitely, that's time flies, right, Dave?
Sure does.
It's been a great ride. Dave's been very instrumental in helping us set up a lot of programs here at Paragon, helping a lot of the utilities here, with several self-assessments, peer checks, info preps, and just recently, within the last year, I would say, since PQI has been a really big focus for the industry, he's been helping with a lot of implementations there as well. So thanks for joining, Dave. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
So we're going to get into the agenda here. I'll do just a real brief Paragon introduction. I think most of the people on know who we are, but for those that don't, I'll just go over a quick overview of Paragon, and then turn it over to Dave, since he is the industry expert on this. And we'll go over, defining what a parts quality program is. We'll go through really the increased focus on equipment reliability now, and all these forced shutdowns, plant trips, things like that. What does good look like as far as the program's concerned? And then certain ways to implement the process at your stations or utilities, fleets, and mass. We'll go through a few feedback items that Southern Nuclear and Energy Harbor went through, and then we'll kind of just touch on more of how Paragon does things with this. So I think it'll be a good discussion today. So who's Paragon? So we're a very innovative and customer-centric company. So with that alone, and what we found is being innovative and creative, putting the customer first, really has led to the growth of our company. We've had some pretty substantial growth, especially since Dave and I joined 7 years ago, but then also just in the last year and a half, it's been pretty overwhelming. Not overwhelming, bad way, overwhelming in a good way. So we've got over 215 employees now. I'm not sure the exact count, that we're hiring people every day. But attributed to that growth, we've had 50 new hires just this year alone, and that's all the way across the board, senior leadership, engineering, lab techs. I mean, you name it. We've hired all those positions this year from top to bottom. We invest heavily in our people, so we have a very strong vetting process where we want to bring in the right people. We don't want to kind of fluctuate the ins and outs. We bring in the right people with industry knowledge or a specific skill craft in a certain area that we're looking for. We're nuclear focused, so that's across the board, whether it's commercial nuclear, the new advanced reactor designs that we're heavy in right now, the medical isotope facilities, the DOE. Our focus is strictly on nuclear, and that's where we plan to be from now to the future. And so investing in those people are very important, the right people, and the technology. So if anybody needs something or we need to upgrade something, we do it really without hesitation. We want to make sure that everybody here has got the right tools they need to get the job done for any request that comes in from our customers. So that our areas are pillars of excellence, if you will, kind of lie here. So equipment qualification, so any of the LOCA testing, environmental testing, HELB or LOCA, all of that's done here. As far as equipment qualification is concerned, I've got several seismic tables, EQ chambers, EMI, RFI chamber, very large EMI, RFI chamber. All of that's right here in our facility. You custom design, whether it's chillers, HVAC units, MCC cubicles, medium voltage breakers, you name it, we'll do it, we'll figure it out. If we haven't done it, that just lies in the expertise of our people here. Alternate sourcing, I'm sure most of you have seen. If you're trying to buy a part from another facility, we're usually the mediator or broker of those parts between nuclear power plants, as well as just sourcing in general. People send parts in and we go find it. INC, repair and reverse engineering, commercial grade dedication, all done here. And then data services, which is more this parts quality implementations like we're talking about, or reviews, critical spare program management, obsolescence program management, that all falls under data services that we do extensively with a lot of utilities. So what's our experience with parts quality? Well, as I mentioned, Dave's kind of the ringleader for sure. So we've got multiple people on staff that have been a part of PQI since its beginning 16 years ago. So our 16 years of experience isn't a collective. We've got multiple people that have been involved from the ground up, since it starts. So we've got contracts with several utilities to help them implement, or at least take a look at their program and offer, comments, this and that, or, the full scale implementation from somebody that really doesn't have anything started. We've got contracts from one end to the other. And we really do understand the importance of, keeping units online, and especially minimizing shutdowns due to critical part failures. So that's really what PQI is about, right? Is making sure that, you have a critical part, and when you install it, it's going to work without failures. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you, because you are the man to talk about this.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. And thank you for everyone joining. And so we want to go through just a parts quality process from the industry perspective, and then a lot of lessons learned from the Paragon approach and how we've helped the industry. And at the end, we'll welcome questions and comments and try to answer all of those. So parts quality, what is parts quality? And it's, pretty simple. Parts quality process is a dynamic, continuous learning process that utilizes both internal and external operating experience to ensure that critical parts and components important to nuclear safety can perform their critical functions once installed. So it's pretty simple. You can come up with that. And it even easier when you think about the parts and components that are installed in your critical equipment. If that component fails, what's the impact on the station? And so we want to look specifically at those items that could make it a bad day at your plant. And that's pretty much parts quality in a nutshell. And then we're going to talk about how you get there. And so just, some bullets here that we'll talk about throughout the presentation. It's accomplished through pre-receipt testing. Make sure you treat those parts a little bit differently than the parts that might not impact plant performance. It could include enhanced receipt inspection, different milestones, source inspections, documentation from the supplier to make sure it's a quality part, and then obviously third-party testing. A lot of that can include improved purchasing rigor. Again, we're talking about parts that could impact plant performance, so we want to treat those special and separate those out. We're also going to talk about storage and how improper storage, shelf life can impact plant performance. We'll talk about that. The important for proper cause, failure cause, to make sure we identify the exact cause so that can get identified and not happen again, which we all want. And then the last item, this all helps you improve on your supplier performance. So getting that feedback to suppliers is really important. As a supplier, and even in my Exelon days when I did supplier performance visits, every supplier wants to give you a good part and do a good job. So that feedback is really, really important. Next slide. As Matt mentioned, I was one of the architects on the Exelon PQI process. And when we started out in 2005, the Exelon leadership, after seeing numerous plant performance issues due to parts, they put us in a room and they said, go solve this. And obviously at the time we had no clue what that looked like. But after many years of tweaking, a lot of lessons learned. I can tell you there was a lot of good lessons learned on different directions, but we perfected it. And then well after I left Exelon, after submitting parts quality for a TIP award, they were recognized in 2018. And for many of you, the TIP award it recognizes above and beyond practices within the industry, not just supply, but really good practices that a utility does. And as we all know, we always like to look for best processes in the industry, and that's how we learn, and that's how the nuclear industry is so well run. So it's been recognized. Next slide. So is parts quality still an issue today? Well, according to INPO and your site leadership, at least the US site leadership, they think it does. So this year, they created a group with INPO and many representatives from different utilities. And they said, we want to get this thing under control. This is coming from your site leadership, managed by INPO. And their goal here, as you can see, is to reduce the amount of plant events by 25% in 2022. So, INPO is looking at this. If you have a site INPO or WANO visit scheduled here in the next 12 months, they will be asking the question, what are you doing in regard to parts quality? And there's many different ways to attack parts quality. We're going to talk about one or two today. But rest assured, when INPO comes or WANO comes knocking at your door, they will be asking the question. So this is not a Paragon driven thing. This is the industry challenging. Next slide. So when you think about parts quality, most people, if you ask them, the reaction is it's the dreaded bad suppliers. And that's what makes up all the parts quality. And while that is certainly true, and all of us suppliers do contribute, hopefully in a smaller scale, but to parts quality issues, that's not the entire cause for parts quality. So like Matt said, over the last couple of years, we've helped a number of utilities establish programs, and I'll talk about our relationship with Exelon Power Lab shortly. But we have a lot of good data, both from the IMPO IRIS report, Exelon Power Labs, and then the utilities that we helped. And this is just a snapshot of the PQI failures from different buckets. And as you can see, it's not just purchasing new. So, you know, a couple highlights, when you transfer a part from another utility, the data, and this is real data from Power Labs failure data, we're seeing a 13% failure rate. And, you know, one of the causes there is when you transfer one part to another, sometimes that utility, I'm not saying you guys are guilty, but, you know, some utilities will make sure they send the oldest part. So that could make up part of the 13%. We've also seen where items have been repaired and refurbished by a various vendor. That's a high failure rate. So again, that's not new, that's repaired. And then the other one that goes unnoticed are items that are returned from maintenance after being issued, not necessarily used, but returned. And sometimes maintenance is slow to return the part, so it's not properly stored, not properly handled. So part of the PQI process that we implement addresses the return parts from maintenance. And then of course, storage in your warehouse. We've seen over the years, as we evaluate data, sometimes lacking shelf life or in storage maintenance, and that can impact it. So as you can see here, parts quality is beyond the supplier. Obviously, that's part of it. But when you think about a parts quality process, you have to think about all those aspects. Next slide. So what are the elements of a good parts quality program? And here's just a couple steps that we have learned over the years. First of all, it comes down to the accurate population of your stock codes, right? You have maybe 70,000, 100,000 different stock codes. You know your number, it's a really large number. So you can't test everything. So identifying those items that are potentially suspect, not only at your site, but through OPEX and the data we have on failures, and then tie it to a critical work order. So that's the key here. And that's, you know, we'll talk about the, you know, where Paragon can help. So identifying the right population, testing the right items. You obviously don't want to break the bank and, you know, bust the budget, testing everything. So the true accurate identification of population is really the key part. But just as important are bullet 2 and 3, the site buy-in from site corporate, you know, your site budget stakeholders, because it does come with a cost, but then your site leadership has to be engaged. And the parts quality process, and I'm familiar with many of them. We helped establish many, but I'm also familiar with programs that have gone on their own. Without this site leadership, without making parts quality a station process, they tend to fail, or they lack the rigor. So making parts quality a station program is really important, and that would be the one of the many takeaways I would tell you on during this call here. Corrective action programs, obviously, how we improve as a nuclear industry is through our corrective action. We identify trends and issues, we create a corrective action, and parts quality is no different. If you see a trend from a different supplier or different model number, it's really important to put that into your corrective action process so it gets fixed. And again, the importance of supplier performance, getting that feedback back to your suppliers. Like I said, almost everyone wants to improve and give you a good part, but giving them that feedback. And through my years at Exelon, I've been on many supplier performance. We identified bad trends. We went to their office, we showed them the failure data from the test templates, and we got results from many manufacturers. Your operating experience, I talked about the importance of internal and external OPEX to feed the quality process. Just because the item isn't really known at your plant, but it could be an issue at another station. So proactively identifying that before it becomes a bad part at your site, really important. And then the importance of self-assessments. For a couple of the utilities that have helped establish the parts quality process, we've already been asked to do a couple self-assessments. And like many of you know, that's how you get better when you develop a program. And one of the key things is to have metrics and indicators. I learned many years ago at Exelon that what you measure, you get good at. And if you have good quality metrics and performance indicator, you'll get better. So those are some of the key aspects of a good parts quality process. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all this. We've kind of touched on some of this, the importance of identifying the correct population. Obviously, that's important. But the two lower right items here, and I'll talk about our alignment with Exelon Power Labs. So when we started parts quality 15 years ago, we utilized Exelon Power Labs, and they have developed thousands of test templates. They have tested now over 100,000 different parts, not only from Exelon, but from the industry. And as you can imagine, that's really the key, developing the quality and proper test template. That could be done if you have a lab at your station or if you have your maintenance shop. It's not that it can't be developed, but over the years at Exelon, when we started up, the test templates weren't always perfect, and we would give that feedback back to a supplier, and they say, we were testing those incorrectly. So after years of experience communicating with suppliers, with maintenance shops, the established templates at Exelon Power Labs are now quality. And so when you test a part, it's the development of the template, the setting up of the test fixture that takes 90% of the time. The actual test of the component actually goes pretty quick. And one utility that we helped implement parts quality, they wanted to develop all their test templates on their own. And you can imagine the amount of work to do that. And so one thing led to another, and we helped them establish a parts quality program. Next slide. So the benefits of doing a parts quality process. One of the key things, if you test the part during receipt and it fails, you have the documentation on the test failure, and then you can return it back to the supplier. I learned many years, at Exelon, I learned the hard way when a part was tested, bench tested, and it failed. And I would call up the supplier and be really mad at him, and he tells me that we bought that 5 years ago, that there's nothing he can do now. I'm sure you've all been in that boat before. So if you test the parts quality part at the time of receipt, you have the failure report. You can send it back to the supplier. Normally it's within the invoicing period of time, and you have real ammunition. This is a real cost savings for you if you do it during this process, because many of the parts you test are expensive, as you can imagine. So sometimes this can almost pay for the process itself. The PQI process does not really look to replace bench testing. We've been asked that all the time. We have procedures and processes with maintenance to do bench testing. So initially, it's not to replace it, although some utilities that have more years of experience with parts quality, they have been successful at removing bench testing. But the benefit of doing the parts quality is to assure that the part is a quality part. Typically, bench testing happens a week before the job, or even a few hours before the job, and this has had an impact on your work management schedule. If it fails bench testing, you don't have another one, they might have to remove the job from the schedule. So schedule stability, I know, is obviously important for every station. So this has improved it, and we have seen great results in giving them a quality part. We talked about supplier performance and the trends for bad suppliers. After years of utilizing the parts quality, the trends start to come into play, and you can see the bad suppliers, the bad part numbers, the bad model numbers. And again, this information comes from the PQI industry. If you partner up with Paragon and Exelon Power Labs, they service now 50 stations. So if there's trends at another station that could impact you, that is very helpful. And again, if you team up as a number of utilities and go after suppliers, you tend to get really good results. We've talked about that. And then we talked about the experience of Exelon Power Labs to have the templates developed. That's really important, and to utilize the same technicians. And then we talked about, using OPEX. So next slide. So what does it take to implement? And this is kind of the Paragon approach that we have used over the last couple of years. And it's two-phased. And one thing we do is we come out and we do this change management, understand your existing processes. We read your procedures. We don't come in and give you, this is the Exelon template, go do it, have fun. Every utility that we've helped develop over the last couple of years, they're all unique in their own special way. And that's because they have unique processes and procedures. So we don't try to reinvent something. We try to align with your processes. So there's two approaches, and obviously we're going to talk to you about your budget. Some stations want the full implementation, so we come in for about 6 to 8 weeks, and we identify all your applicable stock codes up front. Some utilities have said, okay, we want you to focus on our outage that is coming up. Others say, okay, we want to focus on our critical spares, our single point vulnerability. We listen to you, the customer. We spend typically 6 to 8 weeks to identify all this. And again, we're using the Exelon Power Lab data. We're using industry OPEX. We run IMPO IRIS reports. So we get that population, as we talked about, the importance. Other stations have come in and say, we have limited budget, but based on the IMPO project or emphasis this year, they say, well, we know we have to do something. So we had, for some, we come in there and we look at their scheduled work for Crit 1 items. We look at the parts reserved for that critical component. We do the same type match that I referenced in bullet 1 there. And then we flag that as a potential parts quality. We work through their, they take that to their appropriate team meeting, work week meeting. And the question is pretty simple. So this is a critical component scheduled for the end of October. Paragon's identified this is a potential peak parts quality issue component. And it goes mainly to ops and engineering. And the question is, if we install this part in this component and it fails, what's the impact on the station? And if ops comes back and says, well, it could put us into an LCO or scram, well, the decision is pretty simple. You want to test that item. And if they come back and say, well, actually that component really wouldn't impact the performance of that component, and so the decision would be maybe not to test it. And again, that's what we call the graded implementation, and it's weekly support. So again, we want to right size it for your exact needs. What you get, no matter what, is you get a parts quality procedure. We create that. And again, it's aligned with your other procedures, and we'll talk about that shortly. We perform the change management, and this is most important because we sit down with everybody involved with the process, and we make sure that everybody has a say and a role. One of the big eye-opening things when we first did it for a utility is we sat down with their material handlers and receipt inspectors. And obviously they send parts out for testing or failure analysis. So it's part of their process, but we want to make sure that when we normally send a part out for PQI testing, how do they do it in their inventory system? And then the most simple of questions is if they have 5 on hand and they only want to test 1 for the upcoming job, when it comes back as a successful test, the material handler has to know what to do with it. And the worst case would be he takes the 1, he puts it back on the shelf with the other 4, and then the job gets staged or pulled and the material handler takes one of the 5 that has not been tested, and then go fast forward, it gets installed and it fails, and then the corrective action, comes back to you and say, well, we tested it, but we gave you the wrong part. And so you can see how in the process and the change management, you have to think about all those aspects, and we come in there and we do that. And then we develop your metrics and KPIs. Next slide. So this is an interesting slide. And we have seen some sites, some utilities try to perform parts quality on their own, and it can be done. We did, like I said, we did that at Exelon, and it took some time to develop, but I'm not saying it can't be done by, other, utilities on their own. But this data here shows that the failure data, and again, you want to test parts that potentially will fail. So you want to see a failure. You're kind of surprised when it's a part in the warehouse that you bought that is a good part and expect it to be a good part. But through our data, we identify the potential failures. So our success rate on identifying is pretty good. When I talked about the graded approach, a couple of utilities we're dealing with, we're actually hitting close to 50%. They do a smaller amount of testing because of budget. So we look at specific critical components, and our failure rate is running at around 50%. So that's pretty, that makes that station actually pretty happy, some pretty good documentation. Next slide. We talked about procedures, and however you create your parts quality process, it has to be procedure driven. It can't be off the cuff on a piece of paper, driven just by supply. Obviously, we give you a brand new parts quality procedure that we write, but some of your procedures we also tweak. The corrective action procedures, whatever those may be, that will reference parts quality. What happens if we have a parts quality failure? How does that work through the chain in the corrective action? So we'll be revising to include parts quality issues. Stock code creation. I know you all create new stock codes probably daily. And so the person creating that new stock code, he has to be trained on should that be a parts quality item. So in the procedure, it's there's an inclusion list and non-inclusion list, so they know if something should be parts quality. I talked about the importance for the material handlers, receipt inspectors. So obviously the warehouse procedures will be revised to make sure that they're trained on what to do. We also look at your shelf life and storage maintenance. Shelf life, I've looked at shelf life in my 6-7 years at Paragon. I've helped numerous utilities improve their shelf life. There are items that you wouldn't think would have an aging shelf life item, electrolytic capacitor, but they do. We have a lot of data within our Paragon Peak system, and then through OPEX and Exelon Power Labs data, and we always find items that aren't flagged shelf life that should be. And then again, does it have to be in storage maintenance? So we'll take a look at those. Obviously, your equipment reliability procedures and then your supplier performance procedure are all updated appropriately. Next slide. So I mentioned that two of the utilities we've helped create the process. We've come back for a 6-month and 1-year self-assessment. And I put this out, this is a recent self-assessment we just did for one utility. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we did identify a number of items that can cause a bad part that are outside of the supplier manufacturer defect. And when we looked at all the failures from the previous year from that utility, we did take into account these bullets here. Storeroom, are they handling the items? If it's a mechanical item, a fastener, or metal type thing, you can be handled in many relaxed different ways. But when you're talking about electrical or I&C component, it's important that the material handler is trained on how to properly handle storage level, really important. We found for some utilities that stage, sometimes the job gets rescheduled, which is probably a frequent thing at all your sites, and it gets staged in more unimproved storage locations for a long period of time. That was one of the causes we found. Storage conditions. Most of your sites have level B in the US. The temperature, and for some warehouses in the South, the humidity can really take an impact on certain items. So we took a look at that. I already talked about shelf life and in-storage maintenance. Obviously damage during shipping to and from testing, that has to be accounted for. And then issues from maintenance, return from maintenance. And we talked about, that was one of the causes on a slide earlier, 10% where items are returned from maintenance. Sometimes items will return from maintenance after being in the maintenance shop for a year, and who knows how that was stored. Next slide. And like I said, we helped implement at Southern. Pat Long was the parts quality leader. She did a good job, and that's just a quote from her. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but they also came back and asked us to help with the self-assessment. And then next slide, Energy Harbor. We helped implement those. And for both of those utilities, we came in, like I said, it's about a 6 to 8 week. We get all their data, we sit down with their subject matter experts, and we identify all those stock codes up front. We created the procedure, and we basically said, okay, in 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to be up and running. So then next slide. Just so this is my last slide, so why partner with Paragon, Exelon Power Labs? One of the key things, they've tested 100,000 items. So they have a really good track record. They have a lot of test templates that, they're experts in the industry. Some utilities that we have helped, they utilize their own lab, and that can be done. But again, creating the proper test template, as you can imagine, takes a lot of time. Utilizing the number of great lessons learned that I have learned, and the Paragon team has learned many times the hard way. That's pretty valuable when you create a parts quality program. We know not all, but most of the mistakes. And like I said, many of them we learned early on in the process. There are 50 plants now utilizing Exelon Power Labs, the 8,000 failure analysis, and we're also root cause qualified, so we can help you with detailed ACEs, root causes, supplier performance. So with that, I will open it up for any questions or comments you might have.
Yeah, I'll actually unmute everyone, so you'll be able to go ahead and ask questions if you take yourself off mute. You can also use the chat, no problem, Q&A button. Dave, when I get done doing this, I will pull up that. Do you want to pull up that chart as well?
Yeah, that'd be great. Fill that up.
All right. So everybody should be able to go off mute if you want. I'm just going to pull up a data slide here that.
Yeah, so this is a slide that, again, with Exelon Power Labs being an Exelon member, they gathered this data here, and we thought it was pretty impressive, where this is based on SCRAMs, and you can see the different utilities that are struggling more, and then utilities that we have helped, and some that have parts quality. You can see the improvement. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and really demonstrates really the value of parts quality. Obviously, parts quality doesn't address all those issues, but like I said, INPO is looking at improving by the end of 2022. So we think we have results through the process that we've helped implement. So any questions there, Matt?
Yeah, nothing yet. I mean, does anybody have anything that maybe we didn't cover, or you want to go into more detail on?
I've got something, Matt. It's Sean Bagshaw here. How are you?
Good. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Dave. I'm just trying to think of what elements or what questions our utility customers might have about the implementation of a program like this. This is one of those tricky programs where you're measuring something that doesn't happen. So it's a little bit trickier to quantify in terms of the benefit. It's clear, especially since INPO is now monitoring this and tracking it and identifying it as an important initiative for the utilities. And I'm sure all the utilities understand the importance of it. But one of the items that might be bouncing around in the brains of our customers is, what is the actual resource commitment required, on maybe a plant by plant basis in order to implement a program such as this?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we get asked that all the time. And again, as I mentioned, right, what we do is we come into that station or utility, we sit down with their leadership, their owners, and we design it to meet their needs. And the needs also includes financial. So obviously, there is a financial impact. You are paying for the testing, although it's relatively cheap when you think about the impact on a SCRAM, right? But there is a budget impact, and so we sit down early in the stages to identify both the resource and the budget constraints. And we can come in there and do the full implementation. Like I said, we did that with Southern and Energy Harbor, where we spent the 6 to 8 weeks implementing. But then other utilities have said, well, we can't do that, but we can do the more graded approach. So one of the first things we do is we sit down with the leadership of that utility, and we sit down and we say, okay, so this is what we can do. We can right size it for your specific utility. So the answer to your question, Sean, is it's a wide range. And what we tell, and we're getting a lot of utilities coming to us, and that's why we've kind of decided to do this webinar today, because we're getting, I think it's based on INPO coming around. And so the answer is, you can do the full implementation, you can do a partial, but doing nothing is really not the right answer today. So we actually had one utility who 2-3 years ago, they came to me after we kind of pitched it. They said their response 2-3 years ago was, I think parts quality is really a good thing, but I'm not going to implement it at my utility. I just can't afford it. So sorry. Recently, and maybe it's been driven by the INPO initiative, they came to us and they said, okay, so what can you do to help me reduce my number of scrams and parts issues, but don't break the bank. And that's what we're working with them now. So the long short answer is we're going to tweak your parts quality process to meet your station expectations.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Dave, we got one in the Q&A here from Scott. So he asked, in assistance in creating the test templates or providing them directly, or is providing directly available opposed to using Exelon Power Labs testing? So,
so to purchase the test template, is that
the test template or assistance in creating their own?
Yeah, so that would be a question for Exelon Power Labs. Obviously, that test template is very valuable to them because that's where they make their living on testing the parts. And again, Paragon's here to help you develop the process, even manage the process. Like I said, Exelon Power Labs has the trained technicians. They have the vast library of test templates. Now, would they sell those to you? That would be a discussion with Exelon Power Labs, and I can send you their contact information. That would be a decision by Exelon Power Labs. But as you can imagine, if they have this niche and this, established process that's taken them years to create, it might be unlikely. But that would be a question for them. We can get you in contact with the right people. We get that question, by the way.
And then the flip side to that question was, in the event that they can't be procured, what's involved with developing brand new test procedures from scratch?
Yeah, and Exelon Power Labs is still doing that, right? As the parts quality process is expanding, like I said, they're representing now 50 stations in the US. So they're still creating new test templates. So it's not like they have this bulk number and that's all they do. They continue to create new templates. And they, that is utilizing information from suppliers, what information they give out. And like I said, when we started with Exelon, we had a number of test templates that were thought to be really correct, but then when you give the failure data, it's like, oh, we had 10 out of 10 failures. Mr. Vendor, what are you doing? And the vendor came back and said, well, you're not testing it correctly. And then they tweaked the test template to meet the expectations. There are also times when they have taught the supplier a thing or two. So the road goes both ways.
Okay. Anybody else have anything like to ask? Okay, I think that's it.
Just one comment for our overseas friends is we are talking to utility overseas, and obviously it's fairly simple to move a part from anywhere in the US to Exelon Power Labs, which is in Pennsylvania. So that's a pretty simple shipment. But we work with logistic suppliers on quickly moving that part safely. So performing parts quality from overseas is definitely possible. For those of you overseas, it could definitely be done. Obviously, you have to address the shipping a lot more in detail than the US plants would. So.
Okay, Dave and I's contact information's on the deck. We can get that out to everybody. And also you should be getting a copy of the recording. If not, just please feel free to contact us and we'll make sure we get you a recording of the webinar. All right. If that's all, I will we'll let everyone go and have a great day. Thanks for stopping in.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dave. Great job.
Thank
As
you.
usual.
All right. See you, everybody.
Thank you.